Today I am off to do a video. I could be on a plane, I could be doing a ferry trip, I could be at the air show, or I could be looking at rail tours, or I could be at the bus garages, or I might be doing some bus trips, or a timetable challenge. So let's find out together in 3, 2 and 1. Let's start. Hi everyone, welcome back to this channel and welcome to Edinburgh. Well, I thought I would do a tour bus video. Well, there's our tour bus there, the green one. I'm actually looking forward to it. So, there's a couple of tour bus videos coming onto the channel, and yeah, a couple of other things. So, I've got a lot to film today. So, anyway, I've got my ticket. Let's go into that bus and let's jump on. Hiya. I've got a ticket.
To hop on the green one?
Yes, yeah. Thank you, appreciate it. So this is the bottom bunk for you. Well, that's now on our bus. Well, what do I think? Well, the seats have got a good design on them. You've got handles there for when you get off the bus, and you've got a stop button, so if you want to go off anywhere, because the places that we're going to be seeing today are going to be very scenic, so I'm very excited for it. But anyway, the bus is not ready for leaving, so I think I'm going to go get my thumbnail shot, and then I'll head up to the top. So while the top bunk's empty, there's going to be somebody doing a commentary for us. So yeah, I think I'm going to want somewhere near the front. So I think I could sit here. I don't know where you can sit. I think I'll just sit here, so yeah.
Welcome to Edinburgh Bus Tours. I'm Kate, I'm your tour guide for this journey. Our driver downstairs is Miro, and you're on the Edinburgh tour. This is the green bus, and it is an hour and 5 minutes in total for this journey around the city. You have your paper ticket, keep that safe because we operate a hop-on, hop-off service, so you need that every time you get on the bus to show it to your driver. This bus runs every half hour. We have 13 stops on the tour. So if you do want to hop off at any of them, just put your hand up and let me know. If you decide to sit downstairs at any point in your journey, just press the red button to let the driver know that you want off the bus. Otherwise, please stay in your seat. This is for your own safety, of course. Edinburgh, an old city with lots of twists and turns. We don't want anyone tumbling over and hurting themselves on the journey today. On that same note of health and safety, if you do decide to brave the open area of the bus, please don't use anything that stretches over the top or sides of the vehicle. So that's no selfie sticks or umbrellas or anything like that. That's because we have some trees that we travel underneath, so we don't want you losing your phone in a tree. And in the new town we have trams, which means we travel under some live electric wires. So we don't want any electric shocks on the vehicle either. Also, please don't smoke, drink alcohol or vape. That's for everyone else's comfort. And you are welcome to discuss and talk within your groups or present as you are on your camera there, but just keep your volume to a degree. It's not going to disrupt anyone else on the journey today. That would be appreciated, although there is no one else right here, but we might have other people joining us at our bus stops. So on today's journey, we're going to be exploring both of Edinburgh's 2 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. We start here in the new town of Edinburgh we're heading to, and then we're going to head around the old town of Edinburgh and then back through the new town at the end of the tour. So you'll get a good idea for what both of these areas of our city are like. Now, the reason there are 2 UNESCO World Heritage Sites rather than just one is they are very distinctively different. The new town of Edinburgh, it was built between 1767 and 1850. So it doesn't sound especially new, does it?
No.
But this is named, of course, in comparison to Edinburgh's Old Town, which we're now going to see over on the left-hand side. That was originally a walled medieval city, so you can see it climbing up the side of that valley to the crest of the valley, which is the Royal Mile itself, the very heart of Edinburgh's Old Town, and we will have a little look at that in a while.
Yeah.
So the Royal Mile, it begins with Holyrood Palace that we'll see, and it ends with Edinburgh Castle, which we'll see at various points in the journey. Now, you can visit Edinburgh Castle. It is a very popular tourist destination. You can buy tickets for it from our ticket sellers and drivers. Yep. If it says they're sold out online, you can still usually get tickets from us because we have a special set of tickets for you. Also, we sell tickets for Edinburgh Zoo, Dynamic Earth, and Edinburgh Dungeons. So if you're interested in natural history world history, Scottish history, or of course the more macabre history of our city, there's something for you to enjoy.
Yeah.
There are also a lot of free galleries and museums here in Edinburgh you can visit, and I'll try and point out a few of them to you today.
Right.
Now, we are on Princes Street here in the new town of Edinburgh. The new town was built after Scotland and England unionised. That took place in 1707 with the Act of Union. Previous to this, famously, of course, relationships between Scotland and England were not quite as friendly as they are nowadays. And that's why the wall was there around the old city, to keep it safe from attack or invasion. The problem was, though, it being a walled city, as more and more people moved into it, it became very, very overcrowded, and therefore filthy and disease and infection ridden, not the most pleasant place to live. So people with money, people with wealth and nobility, they were moving away from Edinburgh. And that's one of the reasons they decided to build the new town as an affluent area for wealthy families to move to, encouraging them back into the city of Edinburgh. Because it was built after that union, they wanted to recognise that, really cementing it into history. So they named the streets after members of the Hanoverian royal family. That was the royal family at the time of that union. So coming up on the left, you've got George Street, named after King George III. The one that we just left, Princes Street, that's named for his prince, and on the other side is Queen Street for his queen, and we'll have a look at that at the end of the tour. And of course we can't leave out Scotland, can we? So
No.
Here on the right you have St Andrew's Square, named after the patron saint of Scotland. As you can see, open to the public, a great place to go and sit down and have a picnic or to have a coffee. You've got a little coffee stand on the other side. We are coming to stop number 2 here, so if you're wanting to hop off, just let me know, but I think you're looking quite comfortable at the time being. Yeah, no one wanting off here, but we'll just see if anyone's going to join us.
Yeah.
And as we do, we can look to the left-hand side now and see some of these beautiful original Georgian properties. So these were the ones those wealthy families lived in. And as you can see, they are very grand buildings indeed. 3 stories tall and all 3 floors dedicated to those rich families and their lifestyles. And then you've got the basement area down there as well. That's where the kitchens and the workrooms would have been. So that's where the staff would have worked. Very hard day's work for those folks. And they would live on site as well, up in the attic space. So quite cramped conditions up there for them, in contrast to the very lavish rooms that the residents would live in. And these are really typical of Georgian architecture. You've got lots of symmetry in the design, lots of windows to allow fresh air and light into the buildings, very much in contrast to the dark, dingy properties they would have moved from in the old town of Edinburgh. And then these very beautiful entranceways with the columns and pillars decorating them. These are what is called neoclassical in style. The architects who designed the buildings, they would have gone on what was called a grand tour of Europe as young men. They would have visited Greece and Italy and seen ancient Roman and Greek architecture, so classical architecture. Very inspired by that, they brought these ideas back to their designs here in Edinburgh. So we have so much of this decorating the buildings throughout our city, we have a nickname. And that is the Athens of the North, relating to all of this lovely Greek-inspired architecture in our city. And the nickname, the Athens of the North, it doesn't just relate to the architecture, it also relates to quite an important part of Scotland's history. And this was the Scottish Enlightenment period in the 1700s and 1800s, a time of intellectual endeavour here in Scotland. It was invention and discovery in a massive amount of fields of research. So not just architecture, art, literature, philosophy, engineering, medicine, science, economics, philosophy. So a really exciting time. And Edinburgh was very much the centre of that Enlightenment period. So a lot of folks could have lived here in the new town of Edinburgh and been working in the institutions of the old town of Edinburgh. So I'll tell you about a few of them as we travel around today. Including a man called James Young Simpson. He lived at number 52 Queen Street, so that's the next street down from where we are just now. And in 1847, he discovered the anaesthetic properties of chloroform. So that was a pretty vital one for medicine there. Previous to this, if you were going through surgery or childbirth, you would have had no real effective anaesthetic. So like I say, very vital indeed. Even Queen Victoria used this. That was for her 8th childbirth. So imagine doing that 7 times and then finally being given some anaesthesia on the 8th go. You would quite literally be singing its praises, wouldn't you? And she was so impressed, she knighted him. So he became Sir James Young Simpson. And he was very worthy of this. because not only did he work here in the new town with the wealthy and with the royal family, he also set up a clinic in the old town of Edinburgh, where people lived in poverty and disrepair, people who could not afford medicines or healthcare assistance. And he would go there and administer to those people free of charge. So a very kind and generous man, definitely a man worth remembering here in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Later on today maybe, and have a drink and raise that drink in thanks for Votes for Women. Now Edinburgh, not just a city with 2 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, we are also a UNESCO City of Literature, because we have produced and inspired so many famous authors throughout the years. And I'll talk about a few of them as well today. One of them, Robert Louis Stevenson, he was born here in Edinburgh in 1850, and he went on to write iconic stories like Treasure Island, Kidnapped, and The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is one of my favourites. And that one is said to be inspired by the city of Edinburgh. So the two faces of the city of Edinburgh, the bright, light, enlightened new town where we are just now, represented in Dr. Jekyll, and the dark, dingy, dangerous old town of the 19th century, represented in Mr. Hyde, because maybe back then you never knew who might be hiding around the next corner. Of course, perfectly safe to explore nowadays as well. Edinburgh was also the birthplace of the Harry Potter series and the setting of The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by Muriel Spark. So like I say, an incredible amount of writers here in Edinburgh. And as we head back to Princes Street, we can see an incredible monument to one of these writers. This big Gothic monument ahead of us is the Scott Monument to Sir Walter Scott. And you can see a lovely white marble statue of him in the base of the monument. And if you look closely, you might notice that he's got his dog Maida sitting next to him there as well. A writer in the entire world. In one of the legs of the monument is a spiral staircase. You can buy a ticket and a tour guide will take you up there, and you can climb up to 221 steps of that spiral staircase. So you get some pretty phenomenal views up there as well. But now that we leave that behind, we're heading back to Waterloo Place. Don't worry, we're not quite finishing the tour yet though, we're just using that to get down to the old town of Edinburgh. And if you look straight ahead of the bus here, you'll see some more monuments. Above the tree line there on top of Calton Hill, we have the copy of the Parthenon. That is the National Monument of Scotland. They started building that in 1826 to remember people who fought in the Napoleonic Wars in the early 1800s. And of course the final deciding battle of them was the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. So here on the left we pass a statue of Wellington, the main player in the Battle of Waterloo. So he is pointing back up to Waterloo Place, the namesake of his victory there. Now we do enjoy a good nickname here in Scotland, and so that one is referred to as the Three Metal statue, because it was made by a man called John Steele, who also made the one we saw of Sir Walter Scott. It is of course made of metal, and Wellington was often referred to as the Iron Duke, so the Three Metal statue there. And the National Monument of Scotland, it didn't get away scot-free either. Although its nickname is a little bit less complimentary, it is often referred to as Edinburgh's Disgrace, which seems a bit strange for quite an impressive monument. But the reason for this is that it's incomplete. They started it in 1826, they never managed to finish it because they ran out of funding. You can take the steps here on the left and they'll take you up to the top of Calton Hill. You can take a closer look and see if you think it deserves that nickname or not. You also get some lovely views of the city from up there as well. Now we are making our way to stop number 3 as well, so just to check, you're sticking with me for the time being, nobody getting off? Nope, that's grand. And as we head around stop number 3, we're going to start seeing Edinburgh's park, or one of Edinburgh's many parks I should say, because Edinburgh is 49% green space, so wherever you are you can find a lovely park. But Holyrood Park really is the jewel in that crown. So coming up on the right we've got the old town of Edinburgh again, and next to that Holyrood Park, which is 640 acres of public parkland in the very centre of our city. And in the very centre of that you've got Arthur's Seat, the tallest hill we can see there on the horizon. That is the main extinct volcano here in Edinburgh. I say the main extinct volcano because Castle Rock, that Edinburgh Castle is built up on top of, and Calton Hill are both parts of an old volcanic system that Edinburgh is built on. Don't worry though, these were active about 340 million years ago, so perfectly safe nowadays. They are all entirely extinct volcanoes, but really shaping the city of Edinburgh. And the reason we know this is in many ways thanks to a man called James Hutton, another of those great minds of that Scottish Enlightenment period. So you can see the rock face of Salisbury Crags there jutting out over the old town of Edinburgh. So he was studying this rock face and various other land formations around this area. This was back in the 1700s, back when it was believed planet Earth was just a few thousand years old through sort of contemporary religious beliefs of the time. James Hutton, in his studies, he came to the conclusion that planet Earth might be hundreds of millions of years old. So very groundbreaking, but of course very controversial at the time, questioning the religious beliefs of that period. But of course nowadays, thanks to this and work that's gone on from James Hutton, it is now widely believed that planet Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. So I think that gives you an idea of how important that Enlightenment period was, not just for Edinburgh or Scotland, but worldwide in our understanding of planet Earth. And this is why James Hutton is nowadays recognised as the father of modern geology, this study of rock formations and land formations in our understanding of planet Earth. And that is why we have Dynamic Earth here in Edinburgh as well, which you might be able to see just through the trees here on the right, just in the shadows of Salisbury Crags. A very modern building, like a big tent with big white posts coming out of the top of it. So Dynamic Earth, a scientific museum. It was Scotland's Millennium Project, so it was opened in 1999, and it was the sister project to the Millennium Dome in London, the O2 Arena now. So you can head in there and you can learn all about planet Earth. You begin by heading back in a time machine to the very beginnings of planet Earth and go all the way through the stages of planet Earth right out to present day, and it gives you projections for possible futures of our planet as well. So that's a great place to go and have a look at while you're here in Edinburgh. But back to Holyrood Park, back to Arthur's Seat, because there's quite an interesting Scottish folklore story about that as well. It is said that before Edinburgh was here, there was a dragon flying around this landscape. It was terrorising the villages, burning them, eating the livestock, and generally living its best life as a dragon. But eventually it got rather tired. You know what it's like after a big meal and a lot of activity, and so it decided to have a nap. So it curled up there behind Salisbury Crags and fell asleep. And it fell into such a deep sleep, it turned to stone. And then the grass and the gorse grew over the top of that, and that is what Arthur's Seat is, a sleeping dragon or an extinct volcano, or these both different translations of the same thing. Don't worry though, it's not going to be waking up anytime soon. We are just coming to stop number 4 as well, so just to let you know, but I don't believe you are hopping off anyway, but I will announce the stops just in case you do want to hop off and explore. There's also quite an interesting story about Holyrood Park at large and where it takes its name from. So this dates back to 1128. That was when this was a private hunting ground for the royal family rather than a public park for us all to enjoy. And King David I was in there on a deer hunt. He was on horseback and a stag charged at him. This caused him to fall from his horse, and as he lay stunned on the ground, the stag continued to charge. If he was trampled by that stag, he could have been mortally injured. But luckily for him, apparently a big golden cross appeared between him and the stag at the very last moment, and the stag took fright and retreated. So King David, he saw this as divine intervention saving his life, and he decided to build an abbey on that site. He called it Holyrood Abbey, because rood is an old word for a crucifix. So Holy Cross Abbey, built where that golden cross had appeared. And there were some apartments in the abbey for the royals to stay in, and eventually they decided it was more comfortable than Edinburgh Castle itself. The castle being up on top of Castle Rock, being rather blustery, you can imagine, also being a working barracks and such, and by the 1500s they decided it was a rather old-fashioned property. So they decided to build a beautiful, modern, French-style palace and call it the Palace of Holyrood House, and make that their royal residence here in Edinburgh. And it is still the royal residence here in Edinburgh, but when it's not being, when the royals are not staying there, it is open to the public to stay in. Currently closed on a Tuesday and a Wednesday because it is a working palace still, but open today as it is Saturday, I believe. So you could head in there and have a look around, and you can see some of the rooms that the royals historically have stayed in there, including the rooms of Mary, Queen of Scots herself. And you do still have the ruins of the abbey next to the palace as well, so you can have a glimpse of that and then make your way around the gardens on your way out as well. So well worth having a look at that as well. But if you're not hopping off, we will get to see it from the bus anyway. Unfortunately, like I say, the abbey is in ruins. It was destroyed in 1544. This was at the order of King Henry VIII of England. This was a period called the Rough Wooing. Henry VIII wanted the infant Mary, Queen of Scots, at 2 years old, to be betrothed to his son. But the Scottish nobles and her mother didn't want this, so they denied him the opportunity. And he had what could be seen as one of the biggest tantrums of history. Just to let you know, we are coming to stop number 5 here as well, but I don't believe you are hopping off anyhow. So he was not very happy about being told no. And he sent his troops up here to Scotland to try and bully the Scottish people into giving him what he wanted. So they were told to put the city to fire and sword. Here on the left you will see the palace through the gates and get a glimpse of the ruined abbey. So unfortunately they did a very good job. They destroyed a lot of historical properties then in 1544, including the abbey, but they didn't get their way. Instead, Mary, Queen of Scots was sent safely to the court of France to be brought up there, because her mother, Mary de Guise, was French. Again, here on the left, a brief view of the palace as we head on to the Royal Mile. And then a little bit more modern, we've got the Scottish Parliament building here, completed in 2004 after a referendum in which the Scottish people voted for their own devolved powers of government. So we're coming to stop number 6 here as well, if anyone has decided they want off for the palace, the Parliament or the park, but it doesn't look like anyone is wanting off here either, so you're going to be carrying on up the Royal Mile with me here. And as I said, because it begins with the palace at the base and ends with the castle at the top, it has been a royal procession route for over 500 years now. So as we travel up the Royal Mile, we are travelling through 500 years of footsteps of kings and queens. But of course, this being the very heart of old Edinburgh, keep in mind 500 years of footsteps of everyday people as well. This is where Edinburgh really was, surrounded by countryside. The Royal Mile was Edinburgh. And in parts of the city, we're travelling through 900 years of history, because Edinburgh has been a royal borough now for 900 years. That took place in 1124, so we celebrated that in 2024, 900 years of Edinburgh's history. So really incredible. You can't really take a step on the Royal Mile without tripping over a bit of that history, so it's a great place to explore. Now, often it is described as the skeleton of a herring, which sounds slightly strange, but bear with me as I explain. So the head of the fish at the top, the castle, the tail of the fish at the base, the palace, the spine, the Royal Mile leading between the two. And then you've got all these little fine bones leading off a fish skeleton. Those are the closest of the Royal Mile. These little alleys that lead off the Royal Mile and down the side of the valley again. Well worth exploring them and seeing what you might find. As we come to stop number 7 at the Canongate Kirk, on the right you will see Dunbar's Close. If you head down there, there's a lovely little garden to explore. And here at stop number 7, we have the Canongate Kirk, the red-doored church on the right. This is the church where the royal family still go to worship if they're in residence at the palace, so quite an important church there. You've also got 2 free museums here. On the left, you've got the Museum of Edinburgh, of course telling you about Edinburgh's rich history, and on the right, the People's Story, telling you about a social history of Edinburgh, so those people of our city of Edinburgh and their history and the cultural histories of our city. So these are both great places to go and visit, and like I say, they are free to visit as well. But back to the Canongate Kirk, specifically the churchyard around it. You've got some quite important people buried in there, including a Scottish poet called Robert Fergusson. He died very tragically in his early 20s. This was in the late 1700s, and he was buried in that graveyard, originally in an unmarked grave, because his family could not afford a headstone. But it didn't take long for him to get a headstone, because none other than Robert Burns himself paid for a headstone for Robert Fergusson. And this was because the Scots dialect poetry of Fergusson was the main inspiration to the Scots dialect poetry of Burns, Scotland's national poet, of course. Yeah. So if we hadn't had the works of Fergusson, we might not have had the works of Burns. He referred to Fergusson as his brother in prose. That headstone is still in there, and you can still see a verse of Burns' poetry on it as well. Now, Robert Burns wrote some incredible poems and songs, of course, including Auld Lang Syne that we sing at New Year, or what we call Hogmanay here in Scotland, of course. And one of my favourite poems, a poem called Tea Moose, about a farmer who, while doing his ploughing, he disrupts a little mouse, destroys it home, and feels so sorry about this, he writes a whole poem in apology to it, including the line, "Best laid plans of mice and men aft gang agly." And of course, that line was borrowed by Steinbeck for his book titled Of Mice and Men. So Scotland's literature going far and wide and inspiring literature. So really quite incredible, I think. Now, as we head up the Royal Mile, you might be surprised to know that we're not quite technically in Old Edinburgh yet. We're in the Canongate, which was originally a separate borough from the city of Edinburgh. And its name is quite interesting because it's named in no way to do with weapons of war. It is relating back to the Abbey down there next to Holyrood Palace. The canons or the holy men of the Abbey would make their way up the Royal Mile this way. So if you think of the term gate, your gate as in the way you walk. So this was the walk of the holy men up to the city of Edinburgh. And then they would enter by a gate. And that was just at the next set of crossroads we're heading to now. But the gate was actually called a port. The old wall that surrounded Edinburgh, there were about 6 gates in it to allow access in and out of the city, and they were all called ports, and we're heading up to where the Netherbow Port used to be, the main fortified gate in and out of the city of Edinburgh, where you would pay your toll as an individual or your taxes if you were bringing merchandise into the city. So not only was the wall there to protect the city from attack or invasion, it was also there to stop smuggling and such taking place in the old city of Edinburgh. Now you can see there's no longer a gate up here, which is a shame. It was removed in the 1760s to allow what was then modern traffic up and down the Royal Mile. Now it is very much a shame to have lost that old structure, but at the same time, if it was still there, we wouldn't be able to fit the bus up the Royal Mile, so you win some, you lose some.
Yeah.
But we do still have the old bell of the Netherbow Port. You can see it up there on the right. So past the traffic lights to the top of a rather modern building just before the scaffolding, you can see there a large bell hanging up there. So the old bell of the Netherbow Port. That would be rung in the mornings when the gate was opening and in the evenings when the gate was closing, or when public executions were taking place as well. So you might say, for whom the bell tolls. I think we can be quite glad we no longer hear that anymore. However, I did hear it last year. Don't worry, there wasn't an execution taking place. Edinburgh's Pride March makes its way up the Royal Mile, and they were ringing the bell as we went past, which I think is a lovely way of turning that on its head, taking it from something pretty horrific to something very positive. So as we head up here, I'm welcoming you into the old town of Edinburgh. And we're going to be entering the High Street section of the Royal Mile. We're going to come to stop number 8 just in a moment if you're wanting to explore this area, but again, it doesn't look like anyone is hopping off here. Here you will find some more incredible museums to visit. Coming up on the left, we will see the Museum of Childhood. That starts from the 1800s, taking you right up to present day, telling you what it was like to be a child here in Scotland. So here on the left, also free to visit. And then on the other side, down one of the closes, you will find Chalmers Close. And down there, you will find the Museum of Magic, Fortune Telling and Witchcraft. So that one is quite a fascinating one. Not free, but only about £10 or so for your ticket. And in there you can learn about Scottish, Celtic and pagan traditions and the revitalisation of them in the 20th and 21st century. So tarot reading, Wicca, Druidism and such. And also some of Scotland's darkest history. This is the Scottish witch trials of the late medieval period, and these are some of the worst witch trials in the whole of Europe. At least 4,000 people were accused of witchcraft here in Scotland, and at least 2,000 of them were executed. 300 of them here in Edinburgh by strangulation and burning. 84% of these people were women, and of course all of them were innocent, because a witch does not exist, not in the way they're described in those Scottish witch trials. And that's why it's so important to have these sort of museums, to shed a light on these dark times, to educate people and make sure these things are not allowed to happen again. So a fascinating and I would say very important place to visit, and an important part of history to acknowledge. But don't worry, I know you are on holiday, so I'll get back off my high horse and let you enjoy yourself again. So we've now left the Royal Mile. We are on South Bridge here, which is the longest bridge in Edinburgh, but it doesn't look much like a bridge, does it? And that's because it's built over a valley rather than a river, so the buildings are built right up to the edge of it. Look down now on either side and you will see how high up we actually are there, heading over the top of the Cowgate, the one archway of that bridge that is actually open. But now also an institute here in Edinburgh in the 1990s, and now preserved in this museum here. Now I don't think anyone is getting off here, but we'll just see if anyone is going to join us. And the museum, it continues right to the end of the street here. In the 1990s, this holds what is called the Cots. So telling you about Scotland's rich history, starting in the basement area, telling you about the geography and geology of our country, those discoveries by James Hutton and such. And then heading up through the floors, you can see relics of the Pictish tribes. Those were the ones famous for painting their faces blue and going into battle. Such formidable warriors that the Romans got to Scotland, gave up and built a wall instead. Although that might just be also because of Scotland's formidable landscapes as well. Now, just to inform you, we have got a slight diversion on the tour today. The grass market, where we have stop number 10, isn't accessible, so we'll be heading stop number 11 next. But don't worry, we're going on a scenic route, so you'll see some bonus stuff on the tour today. But back to the museum for a moment before we head off. So this building, completed in the 1990s, I think it's a really interesting building. You've got some really fun architecture. For example, ahead here on the left, that shape jutting out from the side of the building there, that is designed to look like the drawer of an old-fashioned filing cabinet. That's jutting out from the side of the building because this is so packed with stuff that you just can't get the drawer pushed shut. So like I say, I think that's quite a fun little bit of architecture there.
Yeah.
You can see that lovely golden sandstone they've used for it as well. So again, replicating the same sort of architecture in many ways of the older buildings here in Edinburgh. So quite sensitively done rather than sticking out too badly as a modern building, I think. And then of course, ahead on the edge of the building, you've got that turret-like structure as well. Again, sort of reflecting the older architecture of our city. And then in here, you can get a lift right to the top of the museum as well, where there is a roof terrace, so you get some lovely views up there as well. But now that we leave that behind, we're going to see a famous little statue of a dog called Bobby. So ahead on the left, just in front of Greyfriars Bobby's pub. Now you will see some people rubbing his nose, and that his nose is very shiny. People tend to rub his nose, believing it's going to bring them good luck. However, Bobby is now on his third nose, so it hasn't brought him today. But now that we've headed away from that, here on the left, some of Edinburgh's university buildings, the old medical school here on the left. This has hosted some incredible minds of history, including Charles Darwin himself and Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes stories. So Edinburgh's universities have been so incredible places in medical research, and a lot of those discoveries made here in Edinburgh would have been used in the old Royal Infirmary here. A beautiful example of Edinburgh's architecture again, the Scottish baronial in style. Nowadays, refurbished, it is the Futures Institute, so owned by Edinburgh University. An incredible place also to go and do your studies, I would imagine. And then when the university is out over the summer in August, we have the Edinburgh International Book Festival, which is hosted here in the Futures Institute as well. So that is part of Edinburgh's festivals. That is the Fringe Festival, the International Festival, the Jazz and Blues Festival, the Free Fringe. We host the largest arts festival in the entire world in Edinburgh during the month of August. The city's population literally doubles for that month. So I would recommend, if you don't have enough of Edinburgh on this visit, come back and visit us one day in August and experience that for yourself. Although get yourself booked in early, because like I say, a very busy time in Edinburgh. But you have all sorts. You have literature, music, art, opera, dance, theatre, comedy, something for everyone and something for every budget as well. So very proud of the fact that I live in a city that hosts that. It is now a private school, but I believe they do still have scholarships for children in that sort of situation as well. Spotting 2, there is a scene with Renton being chased by Begbie, or Robert Carlyle, through this car park here. So, like I say, never far from a film location here in Edinburgh. And last year they were filming Frankenstein here in Edinburgh as well, directed by Guillermo del Toro. So he had recognised how beautiful and well preserved parts of our city are, and we've travelled through some of those locations as well, including where we saw the People's Story, that building of the old Canongate toll booth with the lovely 19th century clock we saw. There is a scene where Dr. Frankenstein makes his way over the Royal Mile and down one of those closes, and you see that building in the background. So it is very exciting seeing Edinburgh on the big screen, so you can look that one up as well. But now we are going to be leaving the old town behind in a moment. We're heading into the new town in a moment. But we've had a really good look around that old town. We've seen those winding streets, those narrow little alleys, and that real mix of different architectural styles in the old town, all because it was built within the confines of the Flodden Wall that surrounded the city to keep it safe. But now we're heading to the new town, a very different area of the city, built over a very short period of time. Well, I say short period of time, about 75 years, but I'd say that's quite short for building basically half a city. So it's a great example of Georgian architecture in the new town of Edinburgh. But just before we get there, we will come to stop number 11. On Lothian Road, but again, I don't think you are hopping off there. And just as we head up there, on the right here we have another graveyard. I know I keep going on about graveyards, but they're great places of history, of course. This is St Cuthbert's Church and Churchyard, and we have quite an intriguing bit of architecture at the edge of the graveyard. So here on the right, the turret-like building. This is a grave watchtower. Added to quite a lot of the graveyards here in the 17 and 1800s. This relates back to the medical schools and those incredible discoveries in human anatomy here in Edinburgh, being one of the front runners of this in the 17 and 1800s. But unfortunately, the medical professors, they were not being supplied with enough human cadavers for their dissections. So people who became known as body snatchers or resurrection men, they would come into these graveyards in the middle of the night. They would look for freshly buried graves. When they found one, they would dig a little hole at the top of the grave where the head would be, break through the coffin and pull the body out quickly, and then put it into a barrel, roll it up the hill to the medical school and sell that body to the professor there, who, I point out, wouldn't ask any questions as to where these bodies were coming from, so are entirely culpable for this as well, and for literally making a market for it, because they would pay these people very well for these bodies, somewhere between £7 and £10 per body. Now, I know that doesn't sound like much money nowadays. That's not even going to buy you a good lunch in Edinburgh today. But back then, this was somewhere between 3 and 6 months' wages for an everyday person, for one night's work. This was also during the Scottish Highland clearances, when people were being forced from their homes in northern Scotland and coming to the cities to try and find work. So people were desperate to find a way to make a living. So the towers like we see here on the right, they were built to employ people to stay in overnight and watch over the graveyards. Maybe you would have called it the graveyard shift. Now, I don't know if that's where that term comes from, but it's very appropriate for this sort of work. Eventually an end came to this in 1832. This was with the Anatomy Act, an act of Parliament which made it easier for people to get bodies, the professors to get bodies to study in a more safe and legal manner. So putting an end to both the body snatchers' work and the graveyard shift. But now, like I say, we're heading away from the old town and some of that darker history of Edinburgh into the new town again. We're going to join Princes Street at the West End. And as we do, you can see an Art Deco building just ahead of the bus here, slightly to the left, with the flag on the very top of it. So this is an old department shop here in Edinburgh. It is now the Johnny Walker experience. So you can go in there and go on a whiskey tasting experience. There are 3 different bars, including a roof terrace bar where you can sip a whiskey cocktail or a whiskey and have a lovely view of Edinburgh Castle itself. It's worth also having a look at the back of your Edinburgh bus tour map, because you get a little discount in there as well, along with a few other locations in the city, some restaurants, some attractions, some shops and some distilleries as well. So worth having a look at that and seeing if you can get yourself some nice deals while you're here in Edinburgh. But now for Princes Street, and you're going to see how different this area of the city is. Very long, straight, wide streets here, so you'll be able to see right down to those monuments we saw. It was built for wealthy people to stay. Those wealthy folks in the Georgian period, which is led by up to 3 or 4 horses. You would need a very wide street to do a full turn or a pass in one of those vehicles. Quite good for our buses and trams nowadays as well. As we continue into the new town, we're turning into Charlotte Square here, one of the best preserved Georgian squares in the entire world. Even the light fittings we see here on the left are the originals of the 1820s. Now, of course, adapted for electricity rather than paraffin, as a lot more environmentally friendly and safer, but lending that lovely Georgian elegance to the area as well. We're going to come to stop number 12 here on Charlotte Square if you were wanting to hop off and explore the Georgian new town, but again, I don't think you are. If you look to the middle of the square, you will see a statue of a man upon a horse there. That is Prince Albert, the husband of Queen Victoria herself. This was unveiled to her 15 years after her husband had passed away. But of course, very famously, she mourned for her husband for the rest of her life. So she was so moved by this statue, when it was unveiled to her, she basically knighted the man who made it there and then on the spot. He was called John Steele. So he became Sir John Steele. If you remember back to the beginning of the tour, we saw 2 other statues he made. The one of Sir Walter Scott in the base of the Scott Monument, and the one of Wellington we saw at the beginning of Prince Street as well. So really shaping the city of Edinburgh. Now you can see the garden here. It's a little bit quieter than we saw at St Andrew's Square. That's because this is a private garden, so a very exclusive one indeed. You can only access this if you have a key, and I believe that is the people that own the properties around Charlotte Square. This did used to be where we hosted the Edinburgh International Book Festival, so they would put up tents here every year in August, and those authors would come from all over Scotland and all over the world to talk about their writing. However, every year when they took the tents down, they would have to replant the grass, so not very practical for a preservation area. So as I said, that's now hosted at the Futures Institute instead. And hello folks, how are you today?
Fine, thank you.
Lovely. Disrupt anyone else. So you've joined us at Charlotte Square, and in a moment we're going to see number 6 Charlotte Square. Just between the scaffolding here, we're going to see Bute House, the official residence of the First Minister of Scotland there. So quite an important property there, Edinburgh's answer to 10 Downing Street. Now continuing through the new town, we're heading down to Queen Street, named after Queen Charlotte, who Charlotte Square is named after. And as we do, we're going to be seeing a monument down here on the corner on the left. So it's just next to the trees here on the corner. This is to a woman called Catherine Sinclair. I will tell you more about her in a moment, but firstly the importance or significance of the monument itself. It is the only monument in the city of Edinburgh, the city centre, to a named woman who was not a member of the royal family. Which I'd say is quite significant considering how many statues and monuments we have in our city. There are apparently more statues of animals in Edinburgh than women. Well, yes, exactly. So I think we should maybe improve on this a little bit, considering how many significant women there are in Scotland's and Edinburgh's history. But back to Catherine Sinclair, who we have that lovely monument to. She lived between 1800 and 1864. She lived in Bute House for a period of time, but she was not the first minister. She was an author. She wrote children's literature, and she basically changed the face of children's literature back then in the 19th century, because the tradition then for writing books for children was to write very dry, dull, moralistic tales. Catherine recognised that this was not very engaging for children. She started writing stories full of fun and adventure and fantasy instead. Fairies and giants and such, really engaging their young minds. So I think we can all be quite thankful to her for this. She was also the person who discovered Sir Walter Scott as an author. That's why her monument was made by someone who also worked on the Scott Monument. And she was a very kind and generous woman as well, putting her money into opening soup kitchens in areas of poverty so people could get a good wholesome meal. Also installing public seating and public drinking fountains. Now back then in the 19th century, disease was spreading through unsanitary water conditions. So supplying fresh, clean drinking water in these fountains would have slowed the spread of disease. So Catherine Sinclair, a pretty incredible woman, I would say, very worthy of that monument. And there are now plans to build a statue of a woman to install on the Royal Mile itself, a woman called Elsie Ingalls. She was one of the first women to officially practice medicine here in Scotland. This was in the late 1800s. Now I say officially because of course women had been practicing medicine for a very long time as midwives and medical herbal women, but of course those Scottish witch trials put a little bit of a dampener on that. So in the 1800s, women were campaigning for their places in medicine and academia as well. And so Elsie Ingalls, she was a nurse, a doctor, and a suffragist campaigning for women's right to vote as well. So another rather impressive woman there of Edinburgh's history. And then in 1914, when the First World War broke out, she went and offered her medical skills. Now I would have thought that would be a very good use of her skills, but the government at the time didn't think so. They advised her quite literally, go home women and sit still. Luckily though, she was not the kind of woman to go home and sit still, so instead she went to Europe anyway. She took Scottish women with her and they set up the Scottish Women's War Hospitals in Serbia and France and Belgium, saving countless lives during the First World War. So I do look forward to seeing a statue of her soon in the very heart of Edinburgh's old town. But now we're making our way through the new town, of course. We're coming to stop number 13. Now this is our final stop on the tour as we make our way back to stop number 1. Doesn't look like anyone is wanting off here, but I mean you guys just joined us. So. Now here ahead of us on either side you've got Rose Street. Rose Street is named after the national flower of England. And on the other side, between George Street and Queen Street, you've got Thistle Street. The thistle, of course, being the emblem of Scotland. The new town was built after Scotland and England unionised. They wanted to recognise that in the street names. So naming them after the national flowers of those two countries, I think is quite a charming and poetic way of doing it. However, here in Edinburgh, we do enjoy a good nickname, and Rose Street is often referred to as the Amber Mile. It's about a mile long, running through the new town as the Royal Mile does in the old town, and this one is lined with pubs and bars. So the amber nectar of whiskey and beer readily available there on Rose Street. Sounds good indeed. A great place to head to later for a few refreshments. And of course, Edinburgh being a university city, the students came up with a pub crawl, the Rose Street Challenge. That's to start at one end of Rose Street, head into each one of those establishments and have yourself a drink and see if you can remember your name and which city you're in by the time you get to the other end. Now, of course, I'm not recommending this. That would be very irresponsible. I'm just telling you of the traditions of our city. But a great place to head to for a civilised drink later on, maybe sampling some Scotch whisky. Now heading on to Princess Street again, ahead on the right, a wonderful view of Edinburgh Castle again there, and we've got Princess Street Gardens ahead of us, between the new town and the old town, planted into that valley. But of course the gardens have not always been there, because the new town has not always been here. Edinburgh used to just be that old town. This was pre-Act of Union, back when those relationships between Scotland and England were not quite so friendly. This whole area to the north of the city was open countryside, leading right down to the coast, where you've got the Firth of Forth. The concern was that troops could moor up there at the Firth of Forth, make their way through the countryside and attack the city quite effectively from the north side. So they did quite a clever thing to protect the city of Edinburgh. There was a river that ran through the valley originally. That's now been diverted underground, just a trickling little stream really, but originally they dammed it, flooding the valley and creating a lake down there. So that was called the Nor Loch, and that's basically Scots for the North Lake, protecting the city from the north side like a moat that you would find around a medieval castle. So quite a clever way to protect your city. Unfortunately though, the old city of Edinburgh didn't have the kind of sanitation standards we're used to today. No real effective waste management, no sewage systems, so that lake that was down there ended up the dumping ground of all of the city's waste. Anything that wasn't dumped down there basically made its way down the side of the valley quite naturally, and the lake of course ended up a stinking cesspool of all of that waste. And unfortunately you could smell that anywhere you were in old Edinburgh, and this gave Edinburgh another of its nicknames, and that was Old Reeky, which basically means Old Stinky of course. So another great example of why Edinburgh was not the most fashionable or favourable of cities to live in for a period of time, until they completed the new town in the 1850s and also decided to drain away the lake and install the gardens down there instead, on what probably was quite fertile land as well. Nowadays the gardens are open to the public and can be enjoyed on any day of the year. A great place for a picnic or an ice cream or a coffee, depending what the weather is doing, but you can get all the seasons in one day here in Scotland. You never quite know which one is coming next, so hopefully you are prepared for that while you're here. But the gardens are a lovely place to take a walk, and imagine the fact that you're promenading through the land that those Victorians in old Edinburgh would have as well. You can reflect on the two sides of the city of Edinburgh as well, from there up into the old town on the right and here into the new town on the left. You can also head into the Scott Monument from there, so that's again the monument coming up here on the right. This neo-Gothic monument of the 19th century. It was completed in 1844, so it has stood here as an icon here in Edinburgh for a very long time indeed. And of course it is to Sir Walter Scott, one of Scotland's famous authors. As we pass it by, you can look into the base of the monument and you will see a white Carrara marble statue of Sir Walter Scott. So in one of the legs of the monument, you can see in the park a little wooden ticket office there. You can buy a ticket and you can climb up 221 steps of a spiral staircase in one of the legs of that monument. So not for everyone, but if you do get up there you get some lovely views. But of course you can look from down here in Princess Street Gardens as well. You might notice lots of small statues decorating the monument. There are 64 of these. They all represent different characters from the works of Sir Walter Scott. So these are the Waverley novels, Ivanhoe and Rob Roy. He was very much a hero of Scotland's culture and heritage, weaving it into his books and poems and taking it to a wider audience. Basically inventing the historical novel, and some might say the Scottish tourism industry. So it's thanks to him that you're here enjoying our city and that I've got my job. Heading away from that, we're going to pass another rather iconic building as well, up ahead here on the right with the clock on the very top of it. This is the Balmoral Hotel, the most luxurious and probably most expensive hotel here in Edinburgh, called the Balmoral. This comes from a Gaelic term which means a majestic dwelling, or a dwelling of a majestic person. And of course the price you're paying for a room in there, that is exactly what you would be hoping for. It is built above Edinburgh's Waverley Station, so when it was first opened in 1902, it was actually called the North British Railway Hotel. A little bit more of a mouthful there. These would be luxury hotels, these railway hotels, because of course train travel was a luxury back then. So think of the Orient Express rather than ScotRail nowadays. you might notice that the clock on the very top of the hotel is set a few minutes wrong. You would think in the most expensive hotel here in Edinburgh they could get someone to fix their clock. No, this is actually done on purpose. It is to give you a little helping hand getting to your train on time. And I can tell you I've definitely found it useful in the past. However, it is set correctly once a year. That is on what we call Hogmanay here in Scotland, New Year's Eve. So we can ring in the bells of New Year correctly, and then it's set back to the wrong time again, so we can get our bus or train home on time. So quite a fun little quirk or tradition there. Now heading back to Waterloo Place, we're on Regent Bridge here, sorry. If you look down on either side, just in a moment here, you'll see how high up we are again. Edinburgh is built on all these hills and valleys, and there are these bridges spanning over those hills and valleys. This one heading up to Calton Hill again, here on the left. So when we get back to stop number 1, you might want to hop off and climb up there and get some lovely views of the city. It's a little bit easier than the Scott Monument, I would say. It only takes about 5 or 10 minutes to get up there. You can either take the steps right to the top, or a more gentle path around. It's called the Hume Walkway, named after David Hume, a Scottish philosopher of Scottish Enlightenment period. So another lovely place to get those views of the city. But now as we turn around and make our way back to stop number 1, I would like to thank you for coming with me on the journey today. So I hope you've enjoyed yourself, learned something new, maybe be inspired by our city and the history. When we get back to stop number 1, the Green bus runs every half hour, so we will be there for 25 minutes. We'll be swapping tour guides, so I'll be hopping off and you'll get someone else hopping on who will tell you all about the city as well. So lots of different stories from all the tour guides. This is also where the Blue Regal tour starts. That runs every half hour, and the Red City sightseeing every 20 minutes. If you've just got the Green tour ticket, you can upgrade with our ticket sellers here. You can also talk to them about tickets for the zoo here, the castle, the dungeons, or Dynamic Earth. So whatever else you choose. Oh, no, I've gone. Whatever else you choose to do, thank you very much for coming. So I'm Kate, my driver's name Miro.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice one, cheers. Yeah, cheers, thank you. Well, you can just catch our bus over there, just behind the blue bus. Well, what did you think of that hour spent on the bus? Well, I thought it was very great. That's a 10 out of 10 for me. The lady there was very good, and she knows a lot of things about Edinburgh. Well, she knows a lot more than me anyway. But anyway, would you guys go on this bus? Well, I definitely would. I would again, should I say. But anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.